Antonio Castillo thought he was returning early to check security protocols, but instead, he walked straight into a situation he never imagined could exist inside his own mansion. The heavy oak door had barely closed behind him when he noticed something was off. The usual bustle of his staff was mysteriously absent. The silence was broken only by the soft click of his expensive Italian shoes against the marble floor as he moved deeper into his domain. A faint rustling sound from his private study caught his attention, making his hand instinctively reach for the concealed weapon inside his tailored jacket. The door to his study was slightly ajar, a thin strip of light spilling onto the hallway floor like a golden warning. Antonio's jaw clenched as he heard hushed voices, one distinctly female with a tremor of fear, the other unmistakably male and unfamiliar. His blood turned to ice when he recognized the female voice belonged to Rosalie, the new maid he'd hired just 3 months ago. Her presence in his private study with an unknown man sent rage coursing through his veins like wildfire, consuming dry brush. Antonio pushed the door open with calculated force, the hinges protesting loudly as the heavy wood swung inward. The scene before him froze his muscles. Rosalie standing wide-eyed beside his open safe, papers clutched in her trembling hands, while a man in black frantically photographed documents. The intruder bolted toward the window without hesitation, disappearing into the garden before Antonio could react. Rosalie remained paralyzed, her honey-brown eyes locked with his, reflecting terror and something else he couldn't quite name. "Please don't move," she whispered urgently, her voice barely audible in the tense silence. "They have men watching the house, waiting for a signal." Her fingers slowly closed the folder of documents, never breaking eye contact with him. Antonio's instinct screamed trap, but the genuine fear in her eyes made him hesitate before calling security. "You have exactly 60 seconds to explain why I shouldn't have you killed," he growled, his voice deceptively calm despite the storm raging within. Rosalie closed the distance between them with slow, deliberate steps, her simple black uniform a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings. "I didn't have a choice," she breathed, close enough now that he could smell her subtle lavender scent. "They have my brother," she continued, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "They threatened to kill him if I didn't get these documents for them. Evidence of your offshore accounts and political connections." Her hands trembled as she offered him the papers. Antonio's mind raced through possibilities. Was she another plant from the Navarro family, or truly an innocent caught in their web? He'd seen enough deception in his business to recognize genuine terror, and whatever was happening, the girl was truly afraid. "Stay silent," Rosalie whispered urgently, pressing a finger to her lips as footsteps echoed in the hallway. "If they believe you discovered me, they'll kill us both." Her eyes darted to the window, where a shadow passed across the garden. The unexpected intimacy of her proximity sent an unwelcome surge of awareness through Antonio's body. This close, he noticed details he'd overlooked before. A faint scar along her jawline, the intelligence behind her fear, and the resolute set of her shoulders despite her terror. His security team would be checking in soon, following protocol when his schedule changed. The question was whether to trust this woman for the next few crucial minutes, or treat her as the enemy she appeared to be. "If you're lying to me," Antonio whispered, grasping her wrist with enough pressure to convey his threat, "there won't be anywhere on this earth your brother can hide you." Her pulse raced beneath his fingers, but her gaze never wavered. Rosalie had never planned to become entangled in the dangerous world of Antonio Castillo when she accepted the position 3 months ago. The prestigious job had seemed like salvation after years of struggling to pay her brother's medical bills following the accident that shattered his spine. The mansion had intimidated her at first, crystal chandeliers worth more than she would earn in a decade, priceless art-lining walls that had witnessed generations of power exchanges. She quickly learned to navigate its hierarchy, becoming invisible as good servants should. Antonio had barely noticed her existence before today, passing her in hallways with the casual disregard of a man accustomed to being surrounded by staff. She'd studied him carefully, though, learning his routines, his preferences, the subtle tells that revealed his moods. Now, as they stood frozen in his study, Rosalie fought to control her racing heart. "There are listening devices throughout the house," she murmured, her lips barely moving as she maintained her composure despite his bruising grip on her wrist. Antonio's dark eyes narrowed with dangerous calculation as he processed her words. He released her wrist abruptly, stepping back to create distance between them, while maintaining the facade of a boss reprimanding an employee. "Your performance has been unsatisfactory," he announced loudly, the sudden shift making Rosalie blink in confusion before understanding dawned. He was creating a cover story for anyone listening, playing the role of the displeased employer. With deliberate movements, he withdrew a pen from his pocket and scrawled on the back of a business card. How many men? Where? His handwriting was sharp and precise, matching the cold efficiency in his eyes as he passed her the card. Rosalie accepted it with outward deference, her mind racing as she considered how much to reveal. Writing quickly, she responded, 4 men, 2 in garden, 1 monitoring security feed, 1 coordinator nearby. She handed back the card, her fingers brushing his. The touch seemed to trigger something in Antonio, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his typically impassive features. For a fleeting moment, Rosalie glimpsed the man beneath the mafia boss, someone capable of making split-second calculations based on limited trust. "You're dismissed for today," he announced loudly for the benefit of listening ears. "Return tomorrow morning to collect your final payment." His tone was dismissive, but his eyes conveyed an entirely different message. Stay alert. Play along. Rosalie lowered her head in apparent acceptance, the perfect picture of a chastised employee. "Yes, sir. I apologize for the disappointment." Her voice carried just the right note of resignation, while her mind raced with the implications of his coded command. As she moved toward the door with measured steps, Antonio's hand shot out to grasp her elbow, his touch surprisingly gentle despite the circumstance. "Leave nothing behind," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear as he slipped something into her pocket. The weight of what felt like a small gun pressed against her thigh through the fabric of her uniform, its presence both terrifying and oddly reassuring. Antonio had armed her, either trusting her story or ensuring she could protect herself if complications arose. Rosalie maintained her composure as she walked through the opulent hallways, past priceless artifacts acquired through means she dared not contemplate. The weight of the weapon and the heavier burden of her brother's fate pressed upon her with each careful step. The security guard at the staff entrance barely glanced at her as she signed out, unaware of the trembling in her fingers or the racing of her thoughts. "See you tomorrow, Miss Hayes," he said casually, never suspecting she carried both a deadly weapon and dangerous secrets. Antonio watched from his window as Rosalie walked down the long driveway, her shoulders squared despite the burden he knew she carried. Something about her calm in crisis intrigued him. She hadn't broken down or begged when caught, instead forming a plan with remarkable presence of mind. The moment she disappeared from view, he activated his secure phone line, contacting his most trusted lieutenant. "We have rats in the walls, Julian," he said quietly, using their established code for surveillance. "Initiate cleaning protocol 5, quietly." While waiting for his security team's arrival, Antonio examined the documents Rosalie had been forced to steal. Most were financial records he'd expected to see, but one file made his blood run cold, detailed accounts of his sister's medical treatments and school schedule. The implications were clear and chilling. Whoever was targeting him had information about his only living family member. This wasn't just about business. It was personal, designed to strike at the one vulnerability he'd tried desperately to protect. Julian arrived within 15 minutes, his team silently sweeping the mansion for listening devices while maintaining the appearance of normal security rotation. Antonio remained in his study, apparently working, while his mind pieced together the puzzle before him. By nightfall, they had discovered 17 surveillance devices throughout the main house, including 3 in his private quarters. The level of infiltration was unprecedented, suggesting an inside connection far more significant than a pressured Maid. "The devices are Russian-made but modified with American components," Julian reported, placing the collection of tiny electronics on Antonio's desk. "Professional job, not something available on the open market." His expression conveyed the seriousness of the breach. Antonio leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin as he considered the angles. "And the background check on Rosalie Hayes?" he asked, keeping his tone neutral, despite the strange tension he felt when speaking her name. Julian placed a thin file before him, expression carefully neutral. "Her story checks out. Brother with spinal cord injury from a car accident 3 years ago. Massive medical debt. Spotless work history before coming here." He hesitated before continuing. "But there's something else." The photograph Julian placed on the desk made Antonio's carefully constructed control slip momentarily. It showed Rosalie's brother in his wheelchair, alongside a man whose face Antonio knew all too well, Diego Navarro, his most dangerous business rival. "The timestamp is from 2 days ago," Julian continued, watching his boss carefully. Seems her brother has been receiving charity from the Navarro Foundation for specialized treatments. The implications hung heavy in the air between them. Antonio's mind raced through scenarios with cold precision, weighing the possibility that Rosalie was a willing Navarro plant against the likelihood she was being manipulated through her brother. Either way, she was now inextricably linked to his most pressing problem. "Find her," he ordered, sliding the photo back into the file. "Bring her here, quietly. No force unless absolutely necessary." He rose from his desk, the decision crystallizing in his mind with sudden clarity. "And Julian, make sure you're not followed." The mansion felt unusually empty as Antonio paced the length of his study, the knowledge of surveillance making the familiar space feel alien and hostile. Somewhere in the complex web of loyalty and betrayal surrounding him, a traitor was feeding information to his enemies. As midnight approached with no word from Julian, Antonio found himself standing before the window, staring at the staff quarters where Rosalie had lived these past months. Had she noticed things his other employees missed? Had she suspected the surveillance before today's confrontation? The harsh ring of Antonio's secure phone shattered the midnight silence, Julian's voice tense on the other end. "We found her apartment empty. Signs of struggle. Neighbor reported hearing a scuffle about an hour ago." Antonio's grip tightened on the receiver, an unexpected surge of concern flooding his system. "Track her phone," he ordered, already moving toward his private armory hidden behind the bookcase. The weight of his shoulder holster felt comforting as he methodically checked his weapons, muscle memory taking over while his mind calculated possible scenarios. Julian's team traced Rosalie's phone to an abandoned warehouse in the industrial district, a location Antonio recognized immediately as Navarro territory. The realization that she might have been taken against her will rather than fleeing by choice shifted something fundamental in his approach to the situation. Antonio assembled his most trusted men within 20 minutes, their faces grim as he outlined what they knew. "This isn't just about business anymore," he explained, spreading surveillance photos across the table. "Navarro is making this personal, using civilians as pawns." The warehouse loomed against the night sky, its dilapidated exterior belying the activity within, guards patrolling in precise patterns that suggested military training. Antonio observed through high-powered binoculars from the adjacent rooftop, cataloging entry points and security rotations. 3 guards at the south entrance, 2 more circling the perimeter, whispered Julian, his breath forming small clouds in the cold night air. Heat signatures indicate approximately 8 people inside, clustered in the central area. He passed Antonio the thermal imaging device. Among the heat signatures, one smaller figure was separated from the group, positioned in what appeared to be a chair or restraint. The implication sent a surge of cold fury through Antonio's veins. Rosalie was being held against her will, possibly interrogated or worse. "Change of plans," Antonio decided, switching his tactical gear for a simple business suit. "You create a distraction at the north entrance in exactly 15 minutes, while I enter through the loading dock." His men exchanged concerned glances at his uncharacteristic decision to personally infiltrate. "With respect, boss, this is exactly what Navarro wants. To draw you out personally," Julian argued, his loyalty evident in his willingness to challenge Antonio's decision. "Let us handle the extraction while you coordinate from a secure location." Antonio straightened his tie with deliberate precision, checking the specialized silencer on his handgun. "This became personal the moment they brought my sister into it," he replied coldly. "Besides, I need to know exactly what Rosalie has told them." The loading dock's security was minimal, suggesting either overconfidence or an intentional weakness designed to lure him inside. Antonio moved with silent efficiency through the shadows, years of street experience before his rise to power serving him well in these moments. He dispatched 2 guards with tranquilizer darts rather than bullets, his choice revealing an unexpected reluctance to create casualties unless absolutely necessary. The sound of a distant explosion signaled Julian's distraction was underway, drawing attention away from his position. The warehouse interior smelled of motor oil and damp concrete, eerily illuminated by fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead like mechanical insects. Following the building schematics memorized earlier, Antonio navigated toward the central area where Rosalie was being held. Through a grimy window in a partition wall, he finally saw her, tied to a chair, her work uniform torn and smudged, but her posture still somehow defiant. A man Antonio recognized as Diego Navarro's head enforcer circled her like a predator, periodically checking his watch. Antonio assessed the situation with clinical detachment, counting 4 armed men plus the interrogator, noting their positions and weapons. The odds were unfavorable but not impossible, especially with Julian's team creating chaos elsewhere in the building. The interrogator's voice carried through the thin walls as Antonio positioned himself for entry. "Your brother received the best care money could buy, Rosalie, and this is how you repay our generosity?" The man's tone carried the practiced smoothness of someone accustomed to breaking people. "I didn't know who you were when you approached us at the hospital," Rosalie responded, her voice hoarse but steady. "You never mentioned the price would be betraying innocent people." Despite her obvious fear, Antonio noted the steel in her spine as she faced her captors. The interrogator laughed, a sound devoid of humor or warmth. "Innocent. Antonio Castillo built his empire on blood and suffering. The man has ruined countless lives without a second thought." He leaned closer to Rosalie, his voice dropping to a whisper Antonio strained to hear. "Did he tell you about the fire at the Hayes Community Center 5 years ago?" The question made Rosalie's head snap up in visible shock. 43 people died when his men torched the building to eliminate one witness, including your parents. Antonio felt the accusation like a physical blow, memories he'd worked hard to suppress rushing back with painful clarity. The Hayes Center fire had been orchestrated by his predecessor before Antonio took control of the organization, a tragedy he'd tried to make amends for anonymously. The enforcer continued his psychological assault, revealing details that connected Rosalie's orphaned past directly to Antonio's inherited sins. "He's been paying your brother's medical bills through shell companies as blood money, guilt payments he disguises as charity." Rosalie's expression shifted through disbelief, horror, and finally a devastating comprehension that made Antonio's chest tighten uncomfortably. "That's why the position at his house opened so conveniently when I needed it," she whispered, pieces falling into place visibly. The truth hung in the air between captor and captive. Antonio had known exactly who she was when he hired her, had deliberately placed her in his household out of some misguided attempt at restitution. The revelation transformed her understanding of the past 3 months completely. Antonio watched as tears finally breached Rosalie's careful composure, tracking silently down her cheeks while her expression hardened into something more dangerous than fear. The girl who had whispered, "Stay silent," now looked capable of bringing his entire world crashing down with her words. His original plan to extract information suddenly seemed hollow and inadequate in the face of this revelation. Antonio had never intended for Rosalie to discover the connection, had convinced himself that providing employment and ensuring her brother's care would somehow balance the scales. The distant sounds of gunfire indicated Julian's team had encountered resistance, meaning his window for action was rapidly closing. Antonio made a split-second decision based not on tactical advantage, but on a foreign emotion he rarely permitted himself: regret. The flashbang grenade he deployed bought precious seconds of confusion, allowing him to eliminate 3 guards with precise shots to non-vital areas. The interrogator reached for his weapon, but found himself staring down the barrel of Antonio's gun before his fingers closed around the grip. "You weren't supposed to be here," Rosalie gasped as Antonio cut through her restraints with a tactical knife. Her eyes reflected confusion, anger, and something unidentifiable that made him uncomfortable with its intensity. "Why would you come yourself?" Antonio secured the unconscious interrogator while responding, his usual measured control slipping. "The same reason you didn't tell them everything they wanted to know, despite what you just learned." He met her gaze directly, allowing her to see past his careful mask for the first time. The vulnerability in that unguarded moment created an unexpected shift between them, a dangerous connection forged in crisis and truth. "We need to move now," Antonio urged, offering his hand to help her stand on unsteady legs. Julian's team can only hold them off for so long. Escape proved more complicated than anticipated, with Navarro's reinforcements blocking their planned exit route. Antonio guided Rosalie through a maze of shipping containers, his hand protectively at the small of her back as they navigated toward an emergency exit Julian had identified. "Your parents deserved better," Antonio said quietly as they paused in shadow, waiting for patrolling guards to pass. "I've spent 5 years trying to make it right, knowing nothing ever could." The admission cost him visibly, decades of carefully maintained control cracking under the weight of her presence. Rosalie studied his face in the dim light, searching for deception, and finding only exhaustion and regret. "You could have told me the truth instead of manipulating my life from the shadows." Her words carried the sting of betrayal without the expected hatred. The wail of approaching sirens complicated their situation further, police involvement the last thing either of them needed. Someone called in the gunfire, Antonio realized, quickly recalculating their options. "We need a different strategy. Follow my lead, and don't question anything I do." When they emerged from the warehouse into flashing police lights, Antonio had transformed completely, his dangerous edge replaced by concerned employer persona. "Officer, thank God you're here," he called out, supporting Rosalie as though she were injured. "My assistant was kidnapped by these criminals." The elaborate cover story Antonio spun for the officers, about Rosalie being his executive assistant targeted by competitors, showcased his chameleon-like ability to become whoever the situation required. Rosalie played along perfectly, her theatrical training from high school finally proving useful. Their performance convinced the police enough to escort them back to Antonio's estate without further questioning, promising to follow up tomorrow after securing the crime scene. The officers' respectful deference suggested Antonio's influence extended deep into law enforcement. The silence in the car during their drive back to the mansion stretched taut with unspoken accusations and revelations. "Your brother has been moved to a secure medical facility," Antonio finally said, breaking the tension. "He'll remain under protection until this situation is resolved." Rosalie's hands twisted in her lap, knuckles white with suppressed emotion. "Was anything real?" "The job interview, your surprise at finding me in your study today, was it all just an elaborate performance to ease your conscience?" Her question cut through his carefully constructed narratives. Antonio's expression remained carefully neutral, but something shifted in his eyes, a weariness that spoke of burdens carried too long alone. "The surveillance was real, as was my reaction to finding you with those documents. Navarro's involvement was unexpected, so I was just a charity case to be managed," Rosalie concluded, her voice hollow as she stared out the window at passing streetlights. "A convenient way to repay a debt without acknowledging your organization's responsibility for orphaning 2 children." Instead of the defensive response she expected, Antonio remained silent for several long moments before answering. "Initially, yes," he admitted with surprising honesty, "but you became something unexpected, competent, observant, resilient in ways that had nothing to do with my intervention." The car pulled through the mansion's gates, security visibly heightened with armed guards patrolling the perimeter. "You have a choice now," Antonio said quietly, as they approached the main entrance. "Julian has prepared documents and resources for you and your brother to disappear completely." Rosalie turned to face him fully, challenge evident in her posture despite her exhaustion. "Running won't solve anything. Navarro will find someone else to manipulate, and you'll find someone else to save to ease your conscience." Her insight made Antonio flinch visibly. The grand foyer felt different as they entered, the opulence now seeming like a facade, concealing the complex web of power, guilt, and responsibility that defined Antonio's existence. "There's another option," he said carefully, leading her toward his study, "one that's considerably more dangerous." Antonio unfolded his dangerous proposition across his antique mahogany desk. Surveillance photos and intelligence reports spread like a battle map. "Navarro believes he's using you against me, but we could reverse the advantage." His fingers traced a path through documented vulnerabilities in the rival organization. Rosalie studied the elaborate plan with growing disbelief, understanding dawning as she processed the implications. "You want me to return to them as a double agent, pretending their revelations turned me against you." The audacity of his strategy was matched only by its danger. "It would require absolute conviction on your part," Antonio acknowledged, his gaze assessing her capabilities with new respect. "Navarro must believe your hatred for me is genuine, must see your desire for revenge as the perfect tool for his purposes." Dawn filtered through the windows as they refined the details, Julian providing intelligence on Navarro's operations, while Rosalie contributed insights from her interrogation. The unlikely alliance formed in the crucible of shared danger began to crystallize into something more formidable. "Your brother remains our most vulnerable point," Antonio noted, concern evident beneath his businesslike tone. "We'll need to fabricate evidence of his death to remove him as leverage against you." The clinical way he discussed such deception revealed years of similar strategic manipulations. Rosalie's expression hardened with determination, her earlier vulnerability replaced by resolute purpose. "Christopher will understand the necessity. He's been prepared for worst-case scenarios since the accident." She straightened in her chair, shoulders squaring with decision. Julian returned with medical scrubs and ID badges stolen from the hospital where Navarro's men had first approached Christopher Hayes. "These will get you past security tomorrow when Navarro's weekly hospital visit occurs." His efficient preparation highlighted the resources at Antonio's command. The transformation began immediately. Rosalie's hair cut and dyed to alter her appearance, designer clothes replacing her maid's uniform, her posture and speech patterns coached to project confidence. rather than deference. Antonio watched the metamorphosis with complicated emotions crossing his typically guarded features. "If they discover your deception, I cannot guarantee your safety," Antonio warned as they finalized preparations, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. Navarro's reputation for cruelty is well earned, particularly toward those he considers traitors. Rosalie applied makeup to enhance the bruises from her captivity, creating a visual narrative of abuse that would support her cover story. "I stopped expecting safety the moment I discovered who was really funding my brother's treatments." Her bitter tone contained enough truth to be convincing. The hospital corridor stretched before Rosalie like a gauntlet as she approached Navarro's weekly charity visit the following day. Clipboard clutched to her chest, fake credentials swinging from her lanyard. She projected the nervous determination of someone with nothing left to lose. Diego Navarro, older, more sophisticated, but no less dangerous than Antonio, recognized her immediately despite the disguise. "Miss Hayes?" he acknowledged with predatory interest, dismissing his entourage with a subtle gesture. "I was informed you had quite the enlightening evening. Antonio Castillo has been manipulating my life for years," Rosalie stated, injecting her voice with carefully cultivated hatred. "I want him to pay for what his organization did to my family." The performance was flawless, built upon the genuine shock and betrayal she'd experienced. Navarro studied her with calculated assessment, searching for deception, and finding only what appeared to be righteous anger. "Revenge is a powerful motivator, but rarely satisfying on its own," he observed, testing her resolve with practiced psychological manipulation. Rosalie allowed vulnerability to show through her facade, the exact amount Antonio had coached her to reveal. "I don't expect satisfaction. I expect justice, and I'm willing to do whatever necessary to expose the truth about the Hayes Center fire." Her words sealed the dangerous pact. 3 weeks of deep cover within Navarro's organization transformed Rosalie in ways neither she nor Antonio had anticipated. The daily performance of hatred, the constant vigilance required to maintain her cover, began to blur the boundaries between truth and deception in her own mind. Encrypted messages passed through channels Julian established, provided Antonio with unprecedented intelligence on Navarro's operations. Each transmission carried greater risk as Rosalie gained access to more sensitive information, her value as an asset growing alongside the danger. Antonio reviewed her latest intelligence drop with growing concern, recognizing patterns that suggested a major move against his organization was imminent. The auction gala scheduled for that weekend would gather all major players in one location, the perfect opportunity for Navarro to strike. Julian voiced the worry Antonio refused to acknowledge, his loyalty extending to uncomfortable truths. "She's been under too long without extraction, boss." The psychological strain of maintaining cover could compromise her judgment or her loyalty. His concern wasn't just professional, but personal. Antonio reviewed the dossier on Rosalie's activities within Navarro's organization, noting the increasing frequency of her meetings with the inner circle. The intelligence she provided had proven invaluable, exposing weaknesses in the rival family's structure that would have remained invisible otherwise. A photograph slipped from between the reports, Rosalie laughing at something Navarro said during a charity function, her expression showing no trace of the fear or anger that should accompany her undercover role. The image stirred an unfamiliar emotion in Antonio's chest that he refused to identify as jealousy. "She's attending their weapons demonstration tomorrow," Julian continued, pointing to the schedule Rosalie had smuggled out. "Navarro only invites potential long-term associates to these events, which means he's considering bringing her deeper into his operation." The implication hung heavy between the two men. Either Rosalie was performing her role with extraordinary skill, or the line between performance and reality was blurring dangerously. Antonio closed the file with deliberate calm, his decision already made despite the risks. "Move up the extraction timeline to the gala. We can't leave her in place any longer." Antonio's response was uncharacteristically sharp, revealing an emotional investment he typically guarded against. "Rosalie understands the stakes better than anyone. She's survived more in 3 weeks than most operatives handle in months." His defense revealed more than he intended. The gala arrived with mounting tension. Security doubled discreetly, as Antonio navigated social pleasantries with practiced ease. His attention remained focused on the entrance, awaiting Rosalie's arrival on Navarro's arm, as arranged in their last communication. When she finally appeared, Antonio momentarily lost his carefully maintained composure. The woman who had once cleaned his home now radiated dangerous elegance in a burgundy gown that whispered wealth and power. The transformation was more complete than he had anticipated. Navarro presented Rosalie to the assembled elite with obvious pride, introducing her as his protégé and consultant. The calculated possessiveness in his manner made Antonio's jaw tighten imperceptibly as he approached to exchange the expected pleasantries with his known rival. "Mr. Castillo," Rosalie acknowledged with perfect coldness when introductions were made, her eyes conveying nothing of their shared secrets. "Your reputation precedes you." The double meaning in her words was detectable only to Antonio, a private communication in plain sight. The evening progressed with increasing tension beneath the veneer of civility, Rosalie expertly playing her role while positioning herself according to their plan. When she excused herself during Navarro's speech, only Antonio noticed her deliberate path toward the secure server room. The first explosion rocked the foundation of the building exactly 7 minutes later, precisely as planned. Enough time for Rosalie to secure the evidence connecting Navarro to the Hayes Center fire and upload it to Julian's secure server. The carefully orchestrated chaos allowed for extraction without detection. Instead of heading toward the designated exit, however, Rosalie moved deeper into the burning building, following a path only she knew. Antonio tracked her deviation through security cameras, alarm growing as he realized she was heading toward Navarro's private office instead of escaping. The second explosion was not part of their plan, separating Antonio from his security team as he pursued Rosalie through smoke-filled corridors. The structural integrity of the century-old building was compromised, support beams groaning ominously above as flames consumed priceless artwork. He found her in Navarro's office, blood staining her elegant gown from a wound in her shoulder as she faced down her would-be mentor. The older man held a gun trained on her with the steady hand of someone accustomed to personal violence, rather than delegated execution. "Did you really believe I wouldn't recognize Castillo's pattern in your questions?" Navarro was saying as Antonio slipped silently into the smoke-hazed room. "The student doesn't yet surpass the teacher. I trained him in the art of deception long before you entered the picture." The standoff stretched taut with dangerous potential, Navarro's attention fixed on Rosalie, while Antonio calculated the best angle of approach. "You disappointed me, my dear. You could have been something extraordinary under my guidance." Navarro's regret seemed genuinely personal beneath his anger. "You used my brother's suffering as leverage, then tried to weaponize my parents' deaths," Rosalie responded, her voice steady despite the blood soaking through her gown. "There's nothing extraordinary about becoming someone like you." Her contempt was no longer performance, but authentic conviction. Antonio moved with explosive precision, his attack catching Navarro in mid-sentence as the building groaned around them. The struggle was brutal and intimate, two men who knew each other's techniques too well to gain easy advantage, their history written in each calculated strike. Rosalie retrieved Navarro's dropped weapon with practiced ease, covering Antonio as he finally subdued his former mentor. "The fire wasn't your order," she stated, rather than asked, pieces falling into place as she witnessed the interaction between the two men. "You were still following his commands back then." Antonio secured Navarro with plastic restraints, his expression grim with old ghosts. "I was his enforcer for 7 years before breaking away. The Hayes Center was my last assignment under his control." The admission cost him visibly, shame evident in his averted gaze. Rosalie absorbed this revelation with surprising calmness, adjusting her understanding of the complex man before her. "So your guilt payments weren't just for inheriting responsibility, but for personal involvement." There was no accusation in her tone, only a search for complete truth. "I failed to verify the information he gave me about witnesses in the building," Antonio confirmed, checking her wound with gentle efficiency. "By the time I discovered his deception, the fire had already claimed its victims." His clinical detachment couldn't mask the old pain beneath. Sirens wailed closer, as the building continued to deteriorate around them, time running critically short for decisions. "We need to move now," Antonio urged, supporting Rosalie toward the hidden exit route while dragging the semi-conscious Navarro with them. "The evidence is already secured." Emergency services swarmed the perimeter as they emerged from the service tunnel, Julian's team creating a corridor of safety through the chaos. The flash of cameras and shouts of reporters created a wall of sensory overload after the focused intensity of the confrontation inside. Antonio made an unprecedented decision in that moment of crisis, stepping directly into the media spotlight with Navarro's restrained form. "This man orchestrated the Hayes Community Center fire 5 years ago," he announced, his public mask discarded for something more authentic and dangerous. The press conference that followed 3 days later transformed Antonio's public identity completely. presenting evidence of Navarro's extensive criminal enterprises, while repositioning his own organization as a legitimate security consulting firm. The carefully crafted narrative contained just enough truth to withstand scrutiny. Christopher Hayes attended the press conference from his wheelchair, publicly thanking Antonio for uncovering the truth about their parents' deaths. The staged reconciliation provided perfect cover for the deeper alliances formed in crisis, allowing both siblings to step into carefully constructed new identities. Behind closed doors, the reality was more complex. Antonio's organization undergoing genuine transformation rather than mere rebranding. Rosalie's influence extended beyond her official position as community liaison, her insight into legitimate business practices reshaping operational priorities. The Rehabilitation Center for Victims of Gang Violence opened 6 months after Navarro's arrest, funded anonymously through Antonio's restructured business holdings. Families displaced by years of territorial warfare found housing and employment opportunities through initiatives Rosalie designed based on her own experiences of vulnerability and resilience. Antonio observed these changes with complicated pride, recognizing that his organization's resources could create protection beyond the threat of violence that had been his predecessor's primary tool. The legacy of fear was slowly being replaced by something resembling respect, earned through community investment rather than intimidation. Late nights in his study shifted from tactical planning to program development, Rosalie's practical wisdom complementing his strategic thinking as they charted a course toward legitimacy that wouldn't leave them vulnerable to rivals. Their arguments were frequent and passionate, challenging assumptions on both sides without the power differential that had defined their early interactions. Christopher's medical background proved unexpectedly valuable as he joined their planning sessions, his perspective as both victim and healer, bringing crucial balance to decisions affecting community healthcare initiatives. The Hayes siblings had transformed from pawns in Antonio's game of atonement to essential architects of a future none of them could have imagined separately. The media narrative of redemption simplified the complicated truth of their relationship, the tension that remained between lifelong obligation and growing genuine connection. Neither fully trusted the other, yet both recognized something valuable in their unlikely partnership. Julian observed the changes with cautious approval, noting how Rosalie's presence seemed to humanize his boss in subtle but significant ways. "She makes you consider consequences beyond strategic advantage," he remarked during a rare private moment. "That's something you've needed for a long time." The mansion that had once felt like a gilded prison to Rosalie gradually transformed into something approaching home, her brother's wing equipped with state-of-the-art rehabilitation technology and staffed by specialists. The whispered "stay silent" that had begun their journey evolved into something neither had anticipated, an honest partnership built on shared secrets and mutual respect. Thank you all for following this story to its conclusion. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, as your support is crucial for me to continue creating content here.